I'm sitting on the right side because we learned you had a little bit of an ear problem coming in, so it's appropriate that you're on the left wing. We know from the subtitle of the first volume of Blinding. And I'm going to try and turn my chair, but it is a little bit off here, so if I stumble, yep, look what happened. I was telling Jill before the event that I always love every year to do an archipelago event. It's an honor for me because there's so many great writers that we're introduced to here in the United States through Archipelago. And when she asked me 2 months ago or so if I would do this, I said sure. And I didn't quite know what I'd signed myself up for. It's an extremely difficult book to stick your finger into and to talk about. It's an amazing set of layers that you constructed in Blinding. It's a novel about a city. It's a novel about the body. It's a novel about what takes place under the body. It's a novel that I think is apocalyptic in certain ways. It's a novel that deals with folklore as well. It's such a fantastic creation that has so many different levels, and they all interact in certain specific ways. And of course, they all deal finally ultimately with memory, and with the aspect of the kind of hyper-real aspect of dreams and sort of the meaning of dreams. And I think, shocked when I first realized that this was actually only 1/3 of the trilogy, which you worked on for I think 15 years. Is that correct?
More or less, yeah.
Yeah. Why don't you tell me a little bit about how the book came into being? Were you still writing as a poet at that point? You started as a poet.
Yeah. If you allow me, before answering your question, I would like to say hello to everyone. I'm really very pleased to be with you in such an intimate group, let's say, but so nice. I would like to tell you that being in the States and trying to make myself a name in this new culture and in this new world is a great challenge for me. It's one of the hardest things I've done in my life. As compared to the American culture, the European different cultures of different countries are very easily to penetrate. America is a hard stone, a hard stone to crack, let's say, a hard nut to crack. But I was lucky. I was lucky that for I found a wonderful publisher, which is here, Jules Kuhlman, and a wonderful publishing house, Archipelago, which took this risk to publish a virtually unknown writer on the American market. Each book has its fate, as the ancients said. So I feel myself obliged to believe in this book and to believe in its fate, not only in Europe, where it does very well, but also here. So I'm very glad that you came to talk a bit about it, and I thank you, Eric, for being so kind to present this book to a little but select part of the American public, I'd say. Well, I think I had written over 20 books before starting to write Blinding. So Blinding is a book of maturity for me. At a certain moment in my in my life and in my career as an author, I felt the need to do something crazy, to do something.
And sitting down and writing a 1,500-page book was your idea.
Exactly.
Fun, crazy.
Exactly. How did you know that? So my idea was to do something monumental, not because I have huge and crazy and kinky dreams, but because doing something very big, very visible, very powerful in a way, is is something that any writer who respects himself or herself should do at least once in a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
You know, T.S. Eliot said that there are things that you cannot tell but in a long poem. The short poems are okay, are fine, but you cannot just shrink everything on one page or on 2 pages. Sometimes you need space, like those big trucks that cannot turn around but in a very large space. So when I started blinding, I was in a way on the highest level of my work so far, and my life, nel mezzo del cammin de nostra vita, and
Such an andante
yes,
way of putting
and
it.
I started it with only 2 ideas on my mind, without knowing anything about its content, what I was going to put in it.
Uh-huh.
But I knew that I wanted to write a book over 1,000 pages big, thick, and this book should be called Orbitor. Orbitor in Romanian is blinding, but with many other connotations. It means literally a dazzling light, a very strong light,
Mm-hmm.
but it also means a mystical light, a light, that light from the Tibet Book of the Dead that calls you far and far away on that road of initiation, or the light on the Tabor mountain where Jesus changed his appearance and appeared surrounded by a very strong light, a light that we call in our language Orbitor. Orbitor is also a very beautiful word in Romanian because it's a sort of a palindrome. You can pronounce it the other way around, orbit or.
Right.
And also contains this syllable or, which in French is gold, and it creates sort of sparkles around the word. So it's a sort of a mandala,
Uh-huh.
in a way. And when I started to write, I was in Amsterdam by that time, in a very small, very tiny room at the penthouse of a house near the Ajax Stadium. I started to write it by hand, so it's a book written by hand completely, having in mind that I have to do something like a sort of a screening and mapping of my mind, of my brain, in a way. So I started...
Like in the sense of a brain scan. Or...
Like a brain scan. So I started with of course, my memories.
Uh-huh.
My memories, having this ambition to go where nobody went, actually, to decipher those first years of my life, the first 2 years of my life, the years that nobody remembers, actually, from his or her own autobiography. So I started digging extremely deep in myself. I started with this ambition of remembering everything from my personal past and where I didn't remember inventing. So my memories in this book are not like in Marcel Proust, for example, those memories provoked by some accidents, but is a memory in the postmodern meaning, in a way. Not recreation, but simply creation of the past. And the book developed itself in a way. I wrote it by hand each and every day without any plan, without knowing where I'm going to get with that avalanche of memories. But I had the surprise that this little origami ball just developed itself like this paper ball thrown into water. It developed itself and created its own space and its own shapes in a way. So it was a very spontaneous book. It was written from the beginning to the end without any overwriting, without any words erased, without anything added, and without anything taken from it.
And so, but it was really a form of automatic writing. I mean, in that sense, or in the surrealist sense, or
it was a sort of a process of continuous inspiration, a sort of a self-hypnosis in a way.
and did you set out when you're writing it that way? Did you set out so that you would, with the explicit sort of rule-bound practice, that you would not return and overwrite anything? Was that your concern?
Yes, I had this in my mind. Because I write by hand, I just love to have very clean pages, without like the children doing school, without erasing lots of words and making ugly spots of ink everywhere. So I want it to be clean. I wanted it to be very nice and clean. And I regret that I didn't bring you one of those notebooks to show it to you, how beautiful it is, this book in its original form on that lined paper of the notebooks. And I finished this first volume in Amsterdam in 2 years, and after that I went to Berlin and I started to write the second volume, which I completed in Berlin and partly in Budapest, where I had some grants, things like that, or I taught at universities there. And when I got to about the half of the book, I felt the need to give it a shape. I couldn't invent all the time. This process of continuous invention had to get to an end, and I started to give this big material that accumulated a shape. So I found that there were about 40 stories that were divergent. So I had to close them from time to time in a certain pace of the book, which was very important. The pace was very important, in such a manner that I could hear them clicking, making click when they ended. So I heard 40 clicks, click, 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 up to the end, when, at the end of the third volume, where I had a final, very big click above. And above this, another one, because the book has about 2 endings, one on the earth, one in the skies in heaven, like in Goethe's Faust, for example. So I had a lot of fun writing this book. It's in a way the book of my life, and I'm
literally and figuratively.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I'm really very happy that I could finish it. It was a miracle for me, and in 2006, when I finished it in Stuttgart, I really cannot tell you if I was happy or appalled. It was both of them at the same time. I was very, very, very happy because this book almost finished me before I could finish it. And I was appalled because I was in the situation of a sculptor, let's say, who has only one block of marble.
Yeah.
So I did my statue, and after that I thought, where am I going to find another block of marble? So I couldn't find it for about 4 years.
But you had published the first volume.
Yes.
That had already been published, and the second volume had
Yes, I
also
published
been
them
published.
all the time in the original Romanian version and in all the translated versions, step by step, volume by volume. Because it would be crazy to offer a publisher 1,500 pages at once. Only Peter Nadash did this with his latest book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Javier Marias did that with Your Face Tomorrow.
Javier Marias
But
too,
then he
yeah.
published them separately, which is
Yeah. But this book, you know, I would add only one thing. It is published in only one volume in 2 languages, but it's like the Bible, like that. In Romanian, of course, when my publisher wanted to make me a big surprise, and in Bulgarian. I have there an absolutely crazy publisher who did a huge book. You can break stones with it.
Passion they published. I don't know, these oversized
Yeah,
passion.
he ruined himself actually by doing this. I advised him not to do this, but
No, that was on the
crazy.
market. It wasn't just a gift.
Yeah,
He
that
sold
was,
it that way.
Yes,
Yeah.
that was on the market. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
but he didn't sell it.
It was theoretically for sale.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I mean, with a book that is so much wrapped up around I mean, you know, Bucharest is one of the great things of this novel. I mean, this is the great Stadtroman of Budapest. That you were, it seems like, I don't know, prompted to write, it's maybe not the right word, but you wrote a lot of it when you weren't in Budapest, when you were in Amsterdam and Stuttgart, etc. That's a really interesting thing. Do you think that, I mean, did travel prompt you, or was that more that you had the time and the space to actually like explore these, you know, avenues of memory?
The things are very, very easily to explain. In Romania, I cannot find the time and the peace of mind to write something really important, let's say. Because in Romania I have to make a living all the time, to write journalism and to teach at the university and do a lot of other things for a living.
I know you're teaching, but what kind of journalism do you do? If you don't, do you do a column?
This is another phase of mine, I would say. I had for 10 years a weekly column in one of the most important newspapers in Romania, and it was completely political. So it was a political column where I wrote about the political situation of my country, and which gave me many opportunities to know in the very depth the life of my compatriots, the life of the profound Romania, and the political life of Romania. But at the same time, it brought me lots of enemies, and at a certain moment, I felt it was too dangerous to continue.
Oh, really?
So 2 years ago, I gave up writing political journalism, because Romania is not genuine country from this point of view. It's a pretty dangerous one.
Yeah, I want to come back to that in a minute. I want to ask you a few questions about being a writer in Romania today. But to continue, I mean, that carved out the space for you to...
Yes, and it was very important. Talking about the cities, and mostly about Bucharest, which is not only a character in this book, not only the background, but it's also an alter ego. It's Bucharest is myself, actually, in this book. There were many writers who wanted to appropriate themselves a city, their own city, the city where they were born. For example, Dostoevsky had St. Petersburg, Lawrence Durrell had Alexandria.
Dublin had
Borges,
Berlin,
well, Dublin is the most famous example.
Dublin. Alexander Dublin, Berlin Alexanderplatz. But
Yes.
yeah, but Dublin, of course.
Joyce is Dublin,
Yeah.
and Borges is Buenos Aires. So I thought that I could do this with Bucharest too. So I could recreate Bucharest in my own shape and appearance, in a way. Bucharest that you'll meet here is not the real one, but it's a remodeling and reconstruction of this book according to my inner fantasies, desires, feelings, and so on. So it appears like a mysterious and strange city, very, very much similar to the main character, Mircea, who is living there.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, there is not only Bucharest present in this very big book, but also other cities which have the, in a way, the function of being like those colored circles on the wings of the butterfly, because I forgot to tell you that this book is a book in the shape of a butterfly. That's why this book is called, this first volume is called The Left Wing, the second is the body, the third is the right wing. So it's a sort of a huge butterfly with the wings spread. And the circles on its wings actually are cities.
Yeah.
So in the first volume you might have noticed that it's a chapter with New Orleans, which New Orleans itself is not the real New Orleans that we all know. In the second volume it's Amsterdam, that it's in the middle of it, and I'm very proud of the chapter with Amsterdam. I can't wait that you might be able to read it in English. And in the third volume is Bellagio, Italy, on the Lake Como, on the northern part of Italy, where some of my ancestors are supposed to have lived. Actually, I invented everything. I have no. My ancestors were peasants. I don't even know the name of my grandfather or my grandmother. But I always dreamed that I could have aristocratic roots, you know, like Peter Esterhazy has, or some other writers. And because I didn't have them, I invented them, and I put a lot of ingenuity and delicacy and stubbornness to create myself a sort of a history.
A kind of counter memory.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a long passage. I think it's the end of the first section where you're in the mountains of Bulgaria and they're making their way across the Danube. No, it's the Danube.
The Danube.
Yeah. Is that completely constructed, or is there actually a sort of family history that's taken?
In the center, or at the center of the first volume, is the image of my mother. So my mother is maybe the most important character in this book. My mother influenced me a lot. She was and she still is, I thank God. She's 85 now. The greatest person that I have ever met. Though she has no education and she is a simple peasant. She's the main character here, and her line, her ancestors are also among the characters here. So she told me once that she was of a Bulgarian origin, and that her ancestors came from Bulgaria, crossed the Danube, and went near Bucharest, in a village near Bucharest. I used this information to create some, as you said, surrealistic images. So to invent a sort of a archetypal struggle between the forces of the heaven and the forces of the hell, a fight against angels and devils, like in Hieronymus Bosch, in a way, because the Bulgarian legends are full of Bogomilism. So the Bogomils, a sort of a primitive Christians who were dualistic, so they believed that the devil and God were brothers, and they both contributed to the making of the world. So there are very strange legends of this kind. Because of that, I invented this fantastic universal fight against the good and the evil, and then I invented the crossing of the Danube on the ice, where in the ice there are butterflies.
Yeah, that's one of
huge
the first times you
butterflies.
get this incredible image of butterflies.
Yes.
Which they consume.
Yes. and I just loved to invent images all the time in a surrealistic way, or in a Baroque and Mannerist way, if you want it.
Mm-hmm.
And that fight between demons and angels is one of my favorite pages in this book.
Yeah.
And I remember it many times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The writing's really lively there. You do this really great thing too, which I don't associate with the kind of description of writing you're talking about, which is that there's just a really strong sense on every page of what everything smells like. There's this like very, redolent odors, and some are quite pleasant, but some are actually very unpleasant. I mean, but it's one of the things that makes the writing really come alive, I think.
Yes, smelling has always been important for artists, and mainly for poets. And this has a reason. Actually, our brain developed from the centers of the smell. So our cerebral hemispheres developed for the two very tiny bulbs with which we smell, actually. So we owe to the smell our mind, our intelligence, our reason, and so on. Everything came from there. And the smell is the most mysterious of all our senses. Nobody knows, not even the scientists who study this problem, nobody knows what chemical combinations unlock the centers of the smell in the brain. All the poets, starting from and culminating, I would say, with the symbolists,
Mm-hmm.
with Baudelaire and Mallarmé and Rimbaud and all the others, relied on smell very, very strongly, because smell evokes. Smell has this quality to evoke memories, to evoke I don't know, images, and so on. Actually, when Marcel Proust talked about that Madeleine, which called into the child's mind a whole continent of the memory, actually he was inspired by the smell of the Madeleine,
Right,
by its flavor, yeah, mainly, not by its taste. So if the smells are very, very pervasive, I'd say, in this book, it is just because they have this evocative power.
Mm-hmm. It's really strong. It's one of the most odoriferous books I can remember since Patrick Süskind's Perfume. So, congratulations on that. One of the things that I think is really interesting as you read through, there are a few moments. They're not a great number of them, but you really notice them where you almost pull back and you say, like, why am I writing this book? What is this book about? I mean, there's one passage that it's at the very, I don't know, it's 3/4 of the way through, where you suddenly stop. You say, maybe in the heart of this book there is nothing other than howling, yellow, blinding, apocalyptic howling. And then you go into something that is very much, we're back in the present, in the moment. Last night, with all my strength sucked dry, I fell asleep between my flaccid sheets and lay like a corpse frozen on a field in an utter lack of existence that made death seem like a pointless agitation, until I reacquired for the first time in 3 or 4 years my state of nocturnal, quote, revelation. In fact, I've never found the right name for it, and the one I use here seems to serve only inasmuch as it is weak and unmarked, because in addition, in the limitless insanity of my, quote, central dream, and here, more than ever, the word my should be in quotation marks, it doesn't, quote, reveal anything to me except perhaps revelation itself. It reveals to me the fact that in this opaque, dense world, murderous as a pillow that someone holds over your face, kneeling mercilessly on your chest to stop your writhing, revelation is possible. There's a certain kind of way that you take this step back at various moments, and that you sort of call into question, what you're doing, what this whole project is about. I mean, that doesn't take anything away from the absolute assuredness of the prose. But I'm curious, is that, you know, was that something you felt as you were writing it? Did you feel that there were moments that you had to step away and say, you know, what is this all about? You know, we should set this up by saying that this is so much of a book that takes place in places that we can't quite, we're never really sure if they're hallucinatory, or if they're a dream, if they're a dream about a dream, whose dream they might even be. So I'm curious, you know, what you might say to us about that.
Yes, it's very interesting from the point of view of the literary theory and of the theory of the novel. This book is a hybrid. It's not a pure book like, let's say, 100 Years of Solitude, which is absolutely flat and shining all the time. This is a hybrid among several possible attitudes, narrative attitudes, between, for example, the first person narrative and the third person one. I always played with these points of views and angles of seeing things and so on, very freely, stepping back and forth, as you said, as compared to the big image. So sometimes I felt the need to break the illusion, to break the illusion in the reader's mind, to make him aware of the fact that the book is only a dream, the book is only a fantasy. So to make him aware of the literarity of this book. So sometimes, as you said, absolutely remarkably, I stepped back to contemplate my painting, let's say, and to include myself in the painting. You know that all the classical painters included their portrait in a corner of the painting. For example, well, yes. Michelangelo painted himself in the skin that a character, human skin that a character keeps in the Vatican fresco. Mm-hmm. So I felt the need to describe myself as I am in this world, which for us is the real one, but for me is actually one of the many possible worlds. So, so to describe myself while writing the book. Mm-hmm. So a sort of a self-referentiality of the book. And what you wrote, what you quoted was very adequate, but in the second volume I just describe myself staying in Schloss Solitude in Stuttgart, and in the third volume, in Stuttgart, and writing this very book, and I describe myself in my whole appearance, the cloth that I was dressed in and so on, everything true to life. Yeah. So it was a hyper-realistic image of mine. Mm-hmm. The book is full of this kind of gimmicks, of literary theory, things more or less kitsch, more or less beautiful, and so on. I played a lot while writing this book. This book seems sometimes, or might seem, too serious, too visionary, too poetic, but actually I had a lot of good time writing it. And it has comical pages, it has satirical pages, it has stories of all kinds, love stories, adventure stories, fantasy stories, and so on in it. So it's not only meditation, metaphysics, or theology, or things like that. They are immediately visible, but they are not everything. This is a book that in a way is like our brain, it's like our minds, full of reason, but also full of folly, in a way.
Have you always been interested in bringing that aspect into your books? I mean, so much of so much of the lexicon is comes from biological sciences, and there are aspects of I think fractal theory involved. There's a lot of cosmology involved, and that's built into the lexicon, but it's also essential to what the book is. Is that something you've always been interested in? It reads as though written by someone who had actually done an internship at Sinai Medical.
The thing that I always reproached to my colleagues, the writers, is that they only read literature. They don't know what they lose. Not reading the real, in a way, literature, which is scientific one, which is psychological one, which is philosophical one, which is all kinds of literature. All the walls of the bookshops are full of them. I do not rely in my image about the world and in my image about myself on only on literature. Mm-hmm. I rely on everything that exists. I'm a poet, and I have always been a poet, and I could tell you that being a writer it's only an accident in my life. Actually, I'm one of the persons that are looking for the truth, in a way, looking for the truth of this world. Why was I born? Why I can see the world? Why I can feel anything? So these are perennial and absolute questions that everyone asks himself or herself from time to time, but for me they are crucial. I really exist for them, and one of my answers is that the world is poetic. Actually, the world is a huge poem, and I have always looked for little drops of poetry everywhere, and I think the sciences are poetry. If you look at them in a special way, in a particular way, philosophy is poetry, in my opinion. The best philosophy of the world is poetry. Think of Plato's visions of an upper world, the world of the ideas, for example. This is poetry. I even, when I read novels, I'm not interested as much in characters and plots and subjects and so on, but I'm interested in the chemistry of the words, that if you squeeze them like you wipe the table with it with sponge, like a sponge. I forgot the name. Like a sponge, just is the poetry which drops. And I gave many times this example from biology. Biology is poetry. The insects are the most poetic creatures in the world. They are demons, they are angels, they are everything you want to be. I gave this example from biology. One of the most important laws of biology is that the ontogeny repeats the phylogeny in the development of the embryo. That is, each of us were once a fish, a lizard, a mammal, a monkey, an ape, and so on. So we just repeated all the steps of our species till we became human. Isn't this poetry? It's a huge poet. It's huge poetry. So, in my opinion, God was a poet, and he wrote the most remarkable poem ever written. And I'm living in this poem, maybe like a coma or something. And I would be very happy to take a step back and to read it completely.
And there is a sense of this kind of species memory that pervades everything in the novel. You have this one great line about it's so fun. It's kind of funny, but it's actually profound. We ought to remember with our testicles in love with our brains.
Yeah.
It's something about our reversed symmetry of how.
Yes. I think it's only my idea. I never found it in some other places that the body is not only vertically symmetric, but also horizontally. That our diaphragm actually is like a mirror, where the upper part of our body is reflected in the inferior part. So the hands have the correspondent the legs. The heart has maybe the bowel, or I don't know what the lungs have a demonic correspondent in the guts, and so on. So the testicles, or what's the female equivalent, ovaries.
The ovaries.
Ovaries actually are the reflection in the mirror of the brain, of the two hemispheres of the brain. And I speculated, like a mystic, from this image, that we use our brain to orient ourselves in space, and we use our sexual organs to navigate in time, because we produce children, so we produce a future, and so on. So this is one of the kind of mystical speculation.
Yeah,
that,
this is along the same lines where you say that
yes.
space is paradise and time is the inferno.
Yes, so I went very much deep inside this,
Yes,
this
definitely.
speculation.
Well, we're going to get far too deep into it probably if we continue in this vein, but I guess we should see if there's anyone would like to have a question or a comment. There's one thing I do want to know about before, and we'll just do that in a second, but you know, the translation is really amazing, and I think it's one of the great successes of the books is just how beautifully translated it is.
Yes.
Did you work at all with the translator, or?
Yes, I worked a
Sean
lot
Cotter
with
is
Sean.
his name.
Yeah, I worked a lot with him, and I want to tell you all that a translator is not like a janitor of literature. He just takes a French word and put an English one instead. He is a great artist. A great translator is extremely precious in this literary world, let's say. He's much more precious and much more important than we might think. A good translator can create you in another language, can ensure your celebrity even in another language. A bad translator could destroy you. A bad translator could give you, could make your book unreadable, actually. And no one has the patience to see what was on the writer's mind if the language in which the book is translated is bad. I am, from this point of view, I'm a very lucky and happy guy, because I work with the most tremendous group of translators that we have ever had for the Romanian language. I would say that some of them are geniuses of the translation, and I mean especially the German translators, Gerhard Scheika and Ferdinand Leopold, who incidentally received the greatest prizes for translation of Germany for doing my book, and and many others. And now I'm very happy that I could add Sean Cotter to this excellent group of translators. I'm very proud of having found him, and very proud of having worked with him. He brought a crucial contribution to this book.
We were talking beforehand, and it may have also been when I was talking to Jill. Romanian writers have always had a relatively privileged position in Paris. There have been, historically, throughout the 20th century, there were so many Romanian exiles in Paris.
Yeah.
There's the tradition of Chora, the tradition of Ionescu. My sense is that has switched slightly to Germany. It seems like Romanians get translated to German. They have an audience. They have a receptive. There's a certain receptivity to translation from Romanian that I don't know if it still exists in France. I assume it probably does in some level, but it does seem like you have a more privileged position in Berlin as a Romanian writer probably now than you did than you would have certainly 20 years ago. And I thought about this. I'd love to hear what you'd have to say about that, but I also am interested to talk to you about. We'll shift over to the sociopolitics of the novel about the situation in Romania today for writers.
Well, I'm being translated so far in more than 20 languages, big languages and small languages, in big cultures and small cultures. And I want to tell you that I don't make any difference between them. I'm as happy to be translated into English and be published in the States as being translated into Serbian or Bulgarian or I don't know, even Basque, for example. For me, all of them are precious because I'm not writing for getting reviews or prizes or I don't know what other things coming out from them, but I'm writing for the people. I'm writing for the readers. So for me it's very important that the Catalans or the Basques or the Bulgarians have access to my books, as well as the Americans or the French or I don't know who. So if I can find 3 or 4 passionate readers for this book of mine and some other books of mine, I'm really very happy. I don't want to be Dan Brown or somebody else who sells millions of books. I'm very pleased if I can sell a decent number of books and they can get to real readers. Because I say it all the time, there is nothing like a great writer without a great reader. Joyce could have written much more books than Finnegan's Wake or Ulysses, but if there wasn't a reader prepared to get those books and to at least try to read something from Finnegan's Wake, these books were in vain. So a writer of genius make us all geniuses, the ones who read him, and a reader of genius has this quality to be essential in the act of writing and reading, which is an act of communication. So a book is only an interface. A book is nothing without its two faces, the writer and the reader. And for me, it doesn't matter which nationality is the reader. For me, it matters that he has the same inner encyclopedia that I have, as Umberto Eco would have said, and he or she has the same cult as I have for the good literature and for beauty, in a way.
Well, that's an interesting observation, and I mean, I guess what I was trying to get at was that, at one point, the translation into French was a real gateway for Romanian novelists, and also for Albanians. We wouldn't have it. We'd be less likely to have Ismail Kadare in English if he hadn't been translated into French, or hadn't written in French. And I was thinking when I was reading a little bit about when I was basically looking into your history of the last couple of years. I was reading about the boycott that you helped lead at the Salon du Livre, which must have been painful. This is I think it was Romania was the guest country. This was 2 years ago, is that right? Or was it 2012, last year? In Paris, which was for promoting Romanian literature, and you felt compelled or impelled to lead writers in boycotting that international exposure.
This happened
what's
this
the story
spring,
with
actually.
that? Okay.
Yeah.
Why don't you? What led to that, and what does that say about
Well, there are
facing in Bucharest
there are some
today?
cultural wars in Romania today, like it might be in the States too. It's the very bad influence of politics everywhere. Politics is like a cancer in Romania. It spreads very fast and touches each and every essential organ of our social life, including culture. That is why, because of our very complicated political situation and because of very few persons that you could rely on in our politics, the cultural institutions are accaparrated, are appropriated by the political parties which are in power. This happened recently with our most important cultural institute, our most important institution, the Romanian Cultural Institute, which was taken from a public person and a wonderful philosopher who ran it for the last 7 years, and given to a person which actually destroyed it, completely destroyed this very modern and very efficient institution. Some of the intellectuals that were the most prominent in my country refused to go to Paris as a protest against this destruction of the Romanian Cultural Institute. Our protest was very welcome and efficient, and it followed that this person was actually fired after that.
Oh, really? Okay.
From this institution, and some other person came in his place. So it was a very big opportunity for us to say our opinion, to speak our opinion in this case.
Is it more difficult to be a writer today in Bucharest than it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago?
Well, you know,
I mean, we read constantly about
it has always been difficult to be a writer in Romania and outside Romania, of course, but mainly inside the country, because Romania is not a place where you can become famous. Romania is a place like one of the villages in the Midwest here, a place where you know that you can evade from. You can go from there. In the real big cities where there is the real life and the real centers of evaluation. So you can produce a very good literature in your country, but you have to sell it abroad. You know, that is why the writers that you mentioned, Emil Cioran, Mircea Cărtărescu, and other big names, Eugen Ionesco, had success because they emigrated to Paris, to New York, to London, and so on. So in the centers of validation, what they did in their own country, they sold abroad. This was their strategy, and it worked very much. At the same time, we had other writers, much bigger than them, much more important, much more significant, who stayed in Romania and never became famous. Nobody knows them outside Romania. So each and every writer from Romania have this dream to be translated abroad and to become famous in a way abroad, to make it himself or herself a name abroad, which is very reasonable in a way.
Mm-hmm. So, oh, I see a hand in the back.
I have a question. You guys have both talked about a lot of male writers. Are there any female writers that influenced you in writing these 3 books?
Many of them, very, very many. But the most powerful influence on this book and other books of mine has been Virginia Woolf. Yeah. With some of her novels, of course, The Waves, her masterpiece, but also Orlando. Orlando was very important for me because it was a book much ahead of its time, in my opinion. Imagine that in the 30s, someone had this courage to create a character and make him live for 200 years, cross the whole history of England for 200 or 300 years, and at the middle change from a man to a woman. It's Marquez, avant la lettre. So this book influenced me very much in another book of mine, a little novel called Travesty, where almost the same happens. Androgynous child was raised at first as a girl, and then at the age of 4 it was an operation, and after that the girl became a boy and forgot he was a girl once. Yeah.
Does he remember at some point? Or?
Sorry?
Does he remember at some point, or does the lack of memory continue into?
No, it was a Freudian process of forgetfulness. And then when the character was 17, he was sexually aggressed, homosexually aggressed by a colleague in a summer camp, and then this provoked him a sort of an anamnesis, and at last he remembers. But it's a long and very painful process for him.
You know, I should point out after that question, your best-selling book is Why We Love Women.
Yeah.
So, which was done in conjunction with Romanian L, which I didn't know L had a Romanian version.
Yes, it has even a very nice one. And they asked me to write a monthly story for them, and I did it with much amusement because I like to do all sorts of crazy things. I refused Playboy before yet, but I wrote a row of stories, about 20 stories, which I'm very proud of them, and which I published in this book that you mentioned. Well, my title was The Paper Devil, but my publisher changed it into a more vendable.
Yeah, vendable is a good word.
Title. When he did this, he said, well, if we replace this silly title, The Paper Devil, what the hell is it? With Why We Love Women.
Why We Love Women.
Your sellings will grow 4 times. And the truth is that they grew 40 times. It's my only bestseller.
Stick with the Romanian publishers and not the Bulgarian publishers. When it comes to vendable advice.
This is for sure. Yeah.
Does anybody else have anything you'd like to ask Sal?
You mentioned Esterhazy and Peter Nadesh. Do you think of this trilogy as either in dialogue with or in competition with like Esterhazy's big books about his parents, or parallel stories, or other central?
No, I'm not in any competition with anyone. I only admire them very much. Peter Esterhazy is one of my great friends. I had many times the opportunity to have to share some grants and things like that with him. I once stayed door to door with him, but it was a silly thing happened by that time. He could only speak German and I could only speak English. So we just said hello. We met and couldn't actually have a talk together.
Mm-hmm.
But after that, he learned English. I couldn't learn German, unfortunately, and we could speak a lot. And when I received this Berlin Prize, he gave the laudatio,
Yeah.
the discourse for me, which was very nice of him.
Oh.
No, I'm only in a very fierce competition with myself at different ages, with the Mircea Cărtărescu who wrote Nostalgia, with Mircea Cărtărescu who wrote The Levant, with Mircea Cărtărescu who wrote Travestii and the poems and so on. So sometimes I'm very angry with them because I feel that I would never be better than them in writing. It's a very, very hard competition for me.
Mm-hmm. And a marathon too.
Yeah.
When you talked about your process of self-hypnosis, how you just wrote it in one straight and never went back and never changed anything, obviously it's very complicated, the book, and it becomes more and more complicated as you go on.
Mm-hmm.
In order to continue on this long road, would you reread parts from before and then continue on, or how did you do that?
Yes, I usually, as I said, I reread each time when I started to write. I only write in the morning. I cannot write but from about 10 to about 12 or 1 o'clock. After 2 o'clock I'm a complete idiot. I never write anything, I just read from time to time. Each time I reread the previous page that I wrote the previous day and write in the same key. And if I notice that I like the detail from the previous page, I develop it.
Mm-hmm.
I develop it. So many characters that I have, there are over 200 characters in this book. Many of them were born from from a gesture,
Mm-hmm.
or from a word, or from something at random.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized its potential. So I developed the character, and sometimes it became, he became or she became an important one.
Mm.
Yeah.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, I think so.
When you say you like your pages to be very clean,
Yeah.
and you don't want erasures and ink blots and things
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that, did that ever inhibit you? Like if you didn't have something ready to go,
Yeah.
did that make you stop and wait until you, and then go, how did
You know, you're amazing. Yeah, you are. You are very intuitive, because this happened hundreds of times. I just started to write a phrase and stop in the middle of it because I couldn't know, I didn't know how to continue it. Not to make some crazy mistake and be forced to erase it.
Mm-hmm.
So many times I only wrote one phrase or two phrases a day,
wow.
and then stopped, and till
you didn't start with a word, you know, I'm going to
till
write
the
1,500
next day
words
I
today.
thought what to do with that phrase, not to take it out, and I invented something to save it, in a way.
Oh,
But that's an interesting thing, because when painters work alla prima, for example, I mean, they really have to prepare. It's like prize fighters going to a boxing match, you know.
Yeah.
They train up to that moment. They design it. They think about it. And
Not
then you
all
get
of
the
them.
whole mural. You know, I mean, Matisse.
Yeah, yeah.
Matisse, when he made the Barnes Foundation mural, talks about this. I mean, and
Yeah.
like what he writes about, like what it means to
Not all of them.
prepare to do alla prima.
Yeah, yeah. I know
Gesture
what you
painting.
mean,
So,
yeah. Of course, if we only think of the great painters of the Renaissance, some of them planified everything. So they first made some big cardboard.
Yeah, you do the maquettes. And,
Yes.
And then they divided
Maquettes.
it up into
And yes, with squares, and everything was drawn
Mapped
drawn
out and,
on
yeah.
on it.
Mhm.
But some others didn't. For example, Raphael did this kind of pre-planning everything, but Pontormo, who followed and who was the first Mannerist painter actually, after Michelangelo, never had a plan. He never knew what he would paint. He started, you know, how the fresco painters do. They cover the wall with plaster, with wet plaster. Only the surface they think they will be able to complete that very day. And he started like in a Cadavreschi. He started drawing a character who crossed his mind, and this character had a hand only drawn till here. The next day, he put another piece of plaster on the wall and continued that hand. But he didn't know what that hand actually
was holding, right?
hold it. It could be an apple. It could be, I don't know what,
A sword.
an Apple mobile phone. So it was a continuous invention. And this is why his works are so strange.
Yeah, and the color is so
Nothing
weird
is
in them
planified,
too.
yeah.
It's always the most garish of the
Yeah.
garish colorists of the.
He did bring maquettes and
Florence.
cartoons to the Sistine Chapel.
Yeah, some of them, yes.
So was there never a single instance in the process of writing all 3 volumes where you crossed something out in the manuscript?
Could you repeat, please?
Did you ever cross anything out in the you talked about writing on a clean page, and did you ever revise or cross anything out as you were writing all 1,500 pages of this book?
Not in this book. In the book that I'm writing now, for example, I write it not in little notebooks, but in big ones that we call in our country student books, bigger ones, A4, you know, or legal as you say it. What I do now I'm growing a bit older, so I cannot afford to write in the same manner. But if I want to add anything, I use those post-it yellow squares, and I stick them on the pages. So each time I want to add anything, and if I want to take something out, I have I just do it. So I just
Cross it out.
yes. But it's a very different kind of book. It's my first book for which I'm doing research. You know, I cannot go on with inspiration like I used to.
Well, I think we're getting close to the witching hour, so why don't we call it a night? And thank you so much. Thank you for joining. Obviously, there are more copies to sell, so avail yourself of that.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for coming.